The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests as individuals, and do not necessarily reflect those of advertisers or sponsors. This show is intended as education and commentary only. The producers strive for verisimilitude, but nothing said on this podcast should be taken as fact by the listener or viewer without performing due diligence. While generally considered safe for work by way of content, some language may be considered offensive by more sensitive viewers or listeners.
All right, cans on, mic's up, level's good. You got me over there? All right, let's roll.
This is Booth to Booth, your direct line to the latest in home voiceover production, with your favorite home VO experts throughout the industry, all across the internet, and all around the world. Booth to Booth is brought to you by the Narrowband Broadcast Network, NBBN. The focus is on you. By Andrew Scott Media, making your media matter. By BOOTHSTUFF, unique VO fashion and swag that's as loud and proud as you are. And by the kind support of our viewers and listeners all around the world via KOFI. KOFI, helping you give back to the creators that help you the most. The session clock is running and all the mics are hot. So let's patch in and get this session started. Here's your host, VO coach, narrator, and producer, Andrew Scott.
And hello, and welcome back to the second season of Booth to Booth. I, of course, am Andrew Scott, and today I'm speaking with one of my favorite people in the VO sphere. Sphere? Boy, I forgot how to talk in the intervening time. He, of course, is the man with the VO Freedom Masterclass, and he's here to talk about all the stuff that's changed in the last 8 months. It's my good buddy Paul Schmidt from Paul Schmidt VO Pro. How you doing, Paul? Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
Yeah,
thanks for having me on.
You bet. A little bit of stuff has changed since we last talked at the beginning of 2023, and I really wanted to talk to you. We kind of came across each other's radar again when we were posting very similar content at the same time on our YouTube channels. First off, how things been for you? How's business? How's life? All that good stuff.
Well, I suppose I've been relatively lucky. I think, business has been good for me. Not quite what it is, we'll say, I'm about flat with last year, and that's not normal for me. And the more I talk to people, it's become pretty clear that the whole industry is going through a slow period. And some would argue a generational slow period. A lot of people have never seen it this slow. There are, of course, people having screaming success, and I've been somewhere in the middle. I've been pretty flat the last year. I will say, though, that when I talk to people outside of voiceover, it's also true for them, for other creative freelancers, for entrepreneurs. And I think that certainly you mentioned, there's been so much change even just this year in 2023. Nobody this time last year had ever heard of ChatGPT. Nobody really used the term generative AI conversationally.
Right.
And then suddenly January, February, March hits and we're all knee deep in it, right? I do think, though, that we, especially in voiceover, we're giving AI too much credit for the disruption that we're seeing right now, the economic disruption.
Interesting.
I think that it's a factor. I think it's definitely a factor, especially in the lower tier work. But I don't think it's the huge hairy monster that we make it out to be just yet. I think that there are global economic factors at play, and I also think that it's going to take us the better part of the rest of maybe the decade to fully get past the ripple effects from COVID-19.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm pretty sure that most of my viewers and listeners were expecting you and I to probably delve into AI, up to our chins. I think you're absolutely right in your assessment of the ripple effects of the pandemic in our industry, and honestly, in the solo content creator sphere and in the gig economy. I think that, and it might very well be because we're all still suffering a little bit of PTSD about the whole thing and will be for well into the future, if not the rest of our generation's lives. I do think that the pandemic put a couple things in front of us that we didn't expect, we didn't know how to navigate. And I say that in both a good and a bad way. I've mentioned to people quite a bit that when COVID really hit, my business blew up. I was busier than I'd ever been. And then, of course, is because of the transition of so much educational material, so much information material, online. And then we need voices, and we need to get this information out. And, how many people wrote books? I mean, I know I wrote a book during the pandemic. And so there was this sudden need for more trained professional voices, combined with, I think, an acceptance of slightly lower quality in order to get the information out. And that doesn't mean that a bunch of us started generating garbage. I don't want to come off saying that, but I do want to say that there was a higher level of acceptance of what constituted good enough, dude. But really, I think that you're right in your assessment that the pandemic is going to be rippling through our economy and our business easily into the 2030s. And that change that we're now experiencing, I think you're right, is not caused by AI. It is exacerbated or maybe given a little bit more oxygen by artificial intelligence. What are you seeing right now, though, that you're noticing in the market? Again, I know that, you being very business forward in your approach to voiceover, you're very acutely aware that right now you're flatter than you should be. You're flatter than you normally are. How are you seeing the market? And I apologize to all my people for mucking with my ear so much. What are you seeing changes in market-wise that you think is coming into play on your own ledger?
So, first of all, everybody wants to talk about AI, and it needs to be talked about. I think that AI is having an impact. As I mentioned before, it's having an impact already in the lower tier work. And when I say that, what I mean is the work, the genres especially, that don't require as much nuance, that don't require as much pure acting chops, right? It's not that the work is lesser because it all pays, cash money, but it doesn't require as high a level of acting skill.
Artistry.
It's artistry, exactly. And so AI is able to replicate that more easily because there is less nuance, there is less artistry involved. And we're already seeing that in e-learning. We're seeing it in especially a lot of stuff that's driven by, people are checking a box, corporate compliance stuff, where quality was never really a driver in the first place. So AI is coming through and picking off a lot of that work. And quite frankly, I think that's a good thing for our business, right? If it's going to take work that we otherwise find drudgery, find as drudgery or doesn't pay well, or work that we were never going to get in the first place as human voice actors, things like back encyclopedic content that was never going to be cost efficient to hire a voice actor to do in the first place. Well, now that content can be published in audio format, and that was probably never going to happen. That's going to help a lot of people, a lot of sight-impaired people that will now have access to that content that couldn't happen before. So AI is not always the big bad wolf that we make it out to be. There's going to be some good that comes from it. But it is definitely going to affect the voiceover business. I think a lot of it is a matter of perspective. If you approach I have been saying this a lot this week, if you approach your craft and your business like a craft and a business, then I think you're going to be fine, because you're going to train and up your skill level to be able to master that nuance and that artistry that we were talking about before. Good voice actors, I think, will always work, right? AI in the let's think about it in the movie space, right? Yes, Marvel can make Kurt Russell 30 years younger, but they still are going to hire Kurt Russell, right? I think in the end, we're going to work alongside of AI, right? The people that work on their craft and treat it like a business will learn to work alongside AI. It will become a tool that we'll just work with, like mocap, right? But a lot of that lower level, what we might consider developmental work will go away. And I saw this happen in my former industry. I was in radio for 15 years. And when I started, every shift was manned by a human being, right? And then voice tracking came in and the technology got more sophisticated. And now, nobody works weekend overnights. And that's where I started my radio career, right? That developmental work was the first to go away, right? Because it was the least focused on quality. And I think there's a parallel there with voiceover. A lot of that.
Not only was it the least on quality, it was because, I was getting out of broadcasting right at the beginning of automation. And really what it was less a focus, not on quality so much, but on personality, on the fact that you need a personality to keep a station going. That suddenly became obvious that you could get away without it. Not that it was better or worse, but that you could get away without it. And of course, a corporation or a broadcasting conglomerate is going to want to cut that corner. And we're going to have the same thing, like you mentioned in VO, where there's going to be certain places to where that level of quality or personality isn't needed. Nobody really needs a deep-seated personality reading the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, all 13 volumes of it, right? But as you said, and as a disabled person myself and a disabled advocate, there are parts of artificial intelligence and generative AI that I'm looking forward to because, as you said, it will open more doors for people to get access to information that they wouldn't have. And this whole thing, when this first bubbled over, and of course, one of the bellwethers that people seemed to think was there was Audible's admission that they were going to be using generative AI voice for certain titles. And they stated expressly that was their main goal, to provide voice to things that wouldn't normally get that treatment. Huge compendiums or, things that were really, as you said, encyclopedic. I'm in favor of breaking down barriers for anyone who wants access to information. And I agree with you that I think what's happening right now, more than anything, is less an invasion of AI and more a weeding and winnowing of our industry. And it's drawing a more distinct line between voiceover practitioners who are there to merely narrate and voiceover practitioners that are there to bring a personality and to act and to show artistry.
I think that's largely true. I think the gulf, and J. Michael Collins has said something similar as well, the gulf, the divide between the established, experienced, in the context of this conversation, we'll call them artists, right? Those folks that have had the time to develop their craft over years and years and years. The gulf between those folks and folks starting out is going to widen, right? It's going to get chasmic because a lot of that developmental work will go away, and it will be harder to make that jump as we move on in time, especially, and I think that's one of the direct effects of AI. I think you're right.
I also think that, I'll pose this in the form of a question. Do you feel now, as opposed to when we made the transition from broadcast, into this home and independent space, do you think it's harder now than it was then to get in, to make that transition?
I think it is because when COVID-19 hit, everybody was scrambling to try and find a way to put food on the table from home.
Yeah.
And so we saw a huge influx, a flood of new talent into voiceover. And I think a lot of people already, when they figured out just how hard this business is, they've already gone by the wayside. I still think we're in a bit of a bubble. I think it's going to take a little bit more for that bubble to even out. But we had a huge influx of talent followed by AI, right? So this big crescendo and then this big, if you want to put it that way, sort of crash. And coming back to back, it feels like there's a lot of turmoil in this business. If you've been around in voiceover for a little while, it's certainly less scary, less volatile, because you've seen some of the ebbs and flows, but also you had time to get established. And the folks many of the folks that came in during the pandemic haven't had that time and are, what was available even 2 years ago may not be available now. And that's a reckoning of sorts. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very upsetting for a lot of folks, and I totally get it. But I still think if you stay focused on your craft, if you stay focused on treating this like a business, that you can and will thrive.
And I think when we come back on the other side of this break, that's the direction we're going to head. We have to. Anybody getting into this business right now needs to be business forward. Unlike the days when you and I might have gotten in, no matter what our personal tack on it was, being entrepreneurs and business people, we are seeing that those that are unprepared for treating this like a business first are the ones that are going to really struggle. But as I said, we are headed to a break. This, of course, is Booth to Booth. That, of course, is my good friend Paul Schmidt. I'm Andrew Scott, and we'll be back right after this. Don't go anywhere, please. Bye-bye.
Booth to Booth is brought to you in part by BOOTHSTUFF.com, the home of the world's most unique VO casual fashion and swag. This thing that we do is pretty unique. So, slap on a Booth Stuff t-shirt that tells the world, or, your cat, that being in a tiny room by yourself is where you truly belong. Shirts, hats, pants, mugs, and more. Well, not a lot more. Actually, that's pretty much it. Anyway, Booth Stuff is the one and only home for VO-centric swag that lets the world know what you do with that mouth of yours. So, head on over to BOOTHSTUFF.com and get something that shows the world who you are and what you love to do. BOOTHSTUFF.com. Loud and proud.
And hello and welcome back to Booth to Booth, the big little show all about VO. I, of course, am Andrew Scott, and I am speaking today with one of my favorite people in the VO sphere, Mr. Paul Schmidt. And Paul, when we went out to the break, I was mentioning, like you, that I think one of the great dividers in who's going to succeed in independent VO and who's going to struggle is the ability to come into this pursuit, this practice, with a business mind that either equals or is slightly greater than that of the artistic mind. You, of course, are the progenitor of the VO Freedom Masterclass, a real roadmap that gets people new to this industry very familiar with treating it like a business, not treating it like something fun. Although, you can do that concurrently, and you really have to. Otherwise, you're going to hate your former love of VO, and you're going to wind up hating your business because it's ineffective. When we're talking about people that are thinking about coming into the VO sphere right now, what is the top line that they should be thinking of by way of treating this like a business? And really, what of that has changed in the last 8-9 months?
Okay. I think top line in terms of treating it like a business is the recognition that, a lot of people have heard about voiceover long before they've ever gotten in. And I think a lot of people are aware of gig economy sites like Fiverr and Upwork, maybe even aware of the voiceover specific sites like 123 and Voices, and Bidalgo and Cast Voices and the rest. And I think there's still a very strong mentality out there that says, oh, okay, if I learn to do the job, if I learn to, perform, if I learn to record and edit and I have a good space, then I can then just jump on the online casting sites and make a good living. That was true maybe 5 or 10 years ago. It's not true anymore.
No, I agree.
It was less true in 2019 than it was in 2015. And then when COVID hit, it upended everything, right? Because the pay-to-plays got flooded because that's the only way that people knew how to find work. And admittedly, our industry is awful at teaching people how to find work on their own. We are trained to sit on the pay-to-plays. We're trained to find an agent and to do those agent auditions and hope we get something there, but we're very passive. And the best illustration of that is the State of VO survey, which every year asks people, how often do you reach out to market your services? And 75% of us say less than 3 times a day, which is mind-boggling to me, because if you go into any other business on earth, right, the primary function is sales and marketing, right? That's how you get business in the door. But we as voice actors, and I think a lot of us, approach this from an artistic background, certainly from an actor's background, we're trained that the audition is the only way to get business, and that's just certainly not true. Hasn't been true for 10 or 15 years.
I agree.
And so I think to understand that you're going to have to market your services, and that made up statistic, 94% of people,
right,
but it's in the 90s, have no previous marketing or sales background. And that's nobody's fault. That's just life, right? We all have diverse professions, but understand that it's something you're going to have to do. So it's something you're going to have to learn. And that's, your primary function as a business person is going to be to get business in the door. And if you rely solely on auditions, elite talent are booking 3, 4, 5 auditions out of 100, right? If you're less than elite, that's maybe 1 or 2 or less per 100.
Yep.
So that's a big time suck that doesn't always lead to a profitable living. And so the recognition top line that you have to market, and you're going to have to learn how to market if you don't already know. And that changes rapidly, right? We've got tools and processes that, I'm teaching an entirely different process than I was 2 years ago. So as market conditions change, as tools change, as technologies change, you got to stay on top of this stuff. So that's number one. What's changed in the last 8 to 9 months, I think, is the recognition that there's less work out there. We all, I think most of us, I don't want to speak for the whole industry, but I certainly believe that this is temporary. It may be medium-term temporary as opposed to short-term, but I think the business will come back. It will come back with, I think, a lot fewer voice actors that I believe will be better trained, because I think we are having kind of an awakening in this business that if we're not well trained, that bot is going to take our work, right?
Yeah.
It's just a fact. And so there's no substitute for being good. I think that awakening is one positive thing for the industry that has happened in the last 8 or 9 months.
I like your analogy. I like your view on this. One of the many things that I did in my life pre-voiceover is I was a machinist and a millwright, and I worked in heavy industry for a long time. And I remember my father worked for a very, very large manufacturer in the upper Midwest, right at the time when robotics came into play. And they did a big show back in like 76, 77, where they were demonstrating this assembly robot, in an open house, and it had a broom, and it was, doing all that stuff. And of course, that immediately engendered a fear into the public about, well, the robots are here to take our jobs. And it really wasn't that. And that wasn't borne out. It was borne out that a number of automated robotic processes were there to take away certain mundane aspects of employment. But most of those people who were removed from the broom sweeping brigade, for a better way to say it, were trained up, were changed out of that position into a higher skilled position. And I agree with you. I think that that's what we're going to be seeing here in the coming years. Yes, there's going to be a segment of the VO industry, the indie VO industry, for whom they're not going to be able to move fast enough. They're not going to be able to jump high enough. They're not going to be able to make that transition and that change and up their skills and up their performances. And they're going to fall away. And they're going to fall away partly due to skill, but also partly due to the lack of perseverance and the lack of ability to understand and appreciate that now's the time to up my game. Now's the time to go and take those in-person acting classes. Now's the time to sign up for something like the VO Freedom Masterclass in order to really get a handle on these changes, how they're going to affect your forward progress, and what to do to pivot and put yourself in a better position.
The better trained you are, whether it's on the marketing side or the performance side, or even the tech side, the more options you give yourself.
Better is better.
Right? Better is better. There's no substitute for being good.
Yep.
Right. And if you think the elite voice actors out there aren't training, you're wrong. They're the ones that train the most. So the old saying, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, is absolutely true. Because if you're staying the same and everyone around you is training and getting better, you're getting worse by comparison.
Exactly. And that's why I said, I think that's the video that you commented on of mine was, when I was talking in one of my recent videos, and I'll link to it up here, as a voiceover coach, talking to people and dispelling this misconception that working with a voiceover coach is a thing that's got a fixed goal and a fixed end to it. And it's not. It's like, being a quarterback. Every quarterback in the NFL still works with a quarterback coach and an offensive coordinator. And, they don't stop. Pavarotti had a voice coach up until the day he died. And it's because I think one of the things that voiceover coaching really does for people that is irreplaceable is it gives them a different point of view on their own practice and where they are, either via their performance or their business or their technical skills. Our industry quite often can be very insular. We get in our booths and, we've got our battle stations with and we can kind of forget that the outside world is there doing its own thing, and so is our whole industry. And if you don't get that dispassionate yet personal point of view on your practice and your own business, you're kind of flying blind.
Absolutely. And that's, to me, community is one of the biggest assets that we have as voice actors. First of all, and I've said this 100 times before, this voice acting community is like no other.
It is so awesome
that I've ever been associated.
It's
amazing,
so good.
Right? So collaborative, so supportive. People are there to help you, period. And I think one of the reasons, we talked a little bit before we came on about conferences and, going to Mavo coming up. I was just at One Voice in Dallas, and my son, who's 16, he said to me one day a couple of years ago, he's like, "Dad, what do you do at these conferences?" And I was like, "Honestly, dude, I laugh and tell stories with my friends for 3 days."
Yeah.
And he's like, "What do you mean? Like, is that you going there just to hang out?" I said, "No, the programming's valuable. We all learn a lot. We exchange information, but the bonding and the support and the recognition that, holy shit, I'm not going through this stuff on my own is huge, right?" And that's why I think we're always happy to see each other. There's hugs and high fives and you name it. And I think it's because of what you touched on, Andrew. We're, I had a call today with Dan Friedman down in Asheville, and Dan had a shirt on that says, I sit in a dark room, in a dark padded room, talking to myself all day and hearing voices. That's what we do for a living. And it makes us a little squirrely. So when we're around each other, we kind of lose our shit a little bit, right? We're like,
my people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the great things about this business. But to your point, community is hugely important because it gives you perspective. It's real easy, especially for people who, your spouse, your domestic partner, whoever it might be, your loved ones, they go off and do their jobs outside the home during the day. And so you're home all day. And it's real easy to use your word, get really insular, right? And really isolated.
Siloed is really one of my favorite words because it literally feels like, being a kid back in the 80s in some empty corn silo going, okay, it's just me now,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's very dangerous. It's dangerous for our mental health. It's dangerous for our businesses. It leads to, when we don't see the successes of others, we don't celebrate our own success. We get really sometimes complacent or even discouraged. And I think that's really, really dangerous. If we don't keep the mind right, then nothing else will follow.
Amen. And for me, one of my MOs with my content, and I know one of the MOs for your presence on both, FaceTube and U-Book. Yeah, I was reaching for that joke, but 55 years old, man, is inspiration. I think inspiration is a really undervalued thing in our industry. I think we come at this like we should already be inspired, because we obviously, unless this has been like a lifelong dream of yours since you were a kid like me, because I was weird, is, you probably got in because you were inspired by somebody. But when you get in and you start the practice, we tend to devalue inspiration, and we confuse it with this weird jealousy of somebody else accomplishing something that you want. And because you can't, you did something wrong or they cheated. And I really dislike that. And I agree with you that the solution for that misunderstanding, that misapprehension, is community. And either, with my community on the Booth to Booth Discord server, which is a very vibrant place, or on, your platforms, I know that, you get a lot of really valuable interaction with people on your Facebook profile, which is, where we see each other there quite often. That leads me to an interesting question before we transition into something else. And that is, really, who were your inspirations? Who inspires you to this day as well, as far as this business goes?
I think the first big inspiration I had in this business, the first conference I ever went to was MAVO. So to be chosen to speak at MAVO coming up this fall is kind of special to me. And one of the first people that I met at MAVO was a name that probably a lot of people in the community will know, Brad Highland.
Oh, yeah.
And Brad had just gone full-time, I want to say in the previous year to two, right? But he had a long career as worked in landscaping, right? And he was, if I remember right, he was either a general manager or he was a general sales manager or something for a landscaping company. He did that for a very long time and had always dreamt of voiceover. And in his late 50s, he made the jump. He had the support of his wife, Kathy, and he tells the story often. Hey, they were out riding bikes one day, and he was going on about voiceover. Will you just take a shot at this?
Please,
right?
Stop.
Yeah. And so, at that age, and I'm only a couple of years, I'm 56, so I'm only a few years behind Brad, and I was making the same transition. And even at that point, I think he had already been booked as Santa Claus and Elf on the Shelf, and was making really, really great inroads into the business. And now, of course, several years later, he's, bordering on freaking legend.
Right.
But he was one of those guys that I went, that he was the guy that I looked at and went, I could take that path, right? Because he's not too dissimilar from me. He's relatable to me, right? And I think so often we look at people that are too far ahead and we play the comparison with others game, which never serves anybody, right? Keep your mind right. Compare yourself with yourself yesterday, yourself last month, yourself last year, right? Look to those other people. Like when I hear Brad's work, like I get inspired because I'm thinking, man, that's good stuff.
Right.
I want to be able to do that, right? And, years later, after a lot of training, when I'm able to look back at my old work and cringe, that's a good thing.
Exactly.
Right? The cringe is a great thing because the cringe means you've developed.
The cringe is a measure of how far you've come.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely it is. And I think anybody that has a mindset of comparison to others, that's a no-win situation. That is simply you beating yourself up rather than controlling what you can control and doing the work that it takes daily.
Amen.
Right? One of my favorite books is Atomic Habits by James
Oh
Clear.
yeah, fantastic book. I'll link to it down in the description because I was floored by that book and how pertinent it was.
I was too. The crux of the title, Atomic Habits, means not these big atomic bomb sort of intense things that we attempt to do. It's not about that at all. It's about habits that are tiny, like atoms, that stack together make molecules, which make, complex everything else, and, becomes the world around us. And that's exactly what habits are. They're tiny things that you do every day that, when stacked over time, make incredible
changing
progress.
Yourself at the quantum level. Yeah,
absolutely.
So look, let's do a quick pivot here. And, you did a presentation at the just a couple months ago at One Voice Conference in Dallas. How did it go? How were you received?
Well, you'd have to ask the folks that were in the room.
That's true. I was giving you space to crow a little bit, but that's incredibly humble of you. You're right. So,
I think it was fairly well received, and what we talked about was how to sort of future-proof your business when we have some scary things going
fantastic
on, right,
segue point, Paul. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Right. So I think one of the things is that freelancing. Let's talk about things outside of voiceover. Freelancing in general is growing by leaps and bounds. And we kind of got into our talk in Dallas, we kind of got into the whys and wherefores, and going all the way back to the 60s and 70s and Milton Friedman and the putting the shareholder at the top of the pyramid and everything else. But the long story short is there's less loyalty, right? You and I, our parents went to work for a company maybe 25, 30 years, got a nice pension, retirement, maybe even a little gold watch. Right? You knew the company was going to take care of you. That doesn't happen anymore. And so, people have assumed risk as individuals more and more as the decades have gone on. And that's why freelancing has grown, because it's not that much greater a risk anymore for someone to jump out of a job where the employer's showing them no loyalty. Well, they might as well become a free agent at that point. Freelancing will have doubled in the last 5 years. And Gen X now prefers freelancing. They freelance. 52% of Gen X are freelancers.
And I think a lot of that also has to do with our generation. It was really the first generation that went, you know what? I don't trust that company is going to be there for me. I think it's the built-in, not cynicism, but the built-in realism of our generation going, you know what? This feels suspiciously like late-stage capitalism to me, so I would really much rather be piloting my own boat.
Absolutely. And so we talked about that, and I think the upshot of that for us, Andrew, is to, yes, if you're a voice talent and that's your primary love, that's who you are. But it doesn't mean that's all you have to do. And I think the mindset where we have one thing that we do to bring in income has to change.
I agree. Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that.
I think we've got to diversify. For a lot of people, they have to diversify their income streams. So, for example, if you're primarily a voice talent, maybe you can also take on audio editing. Maybe you're good on social media and can help people with that. Maybe you're also a photographer, a video editor, whatever it is. Think of ourselves more as creative freelancers and less as, I'm this one thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with transitioning out of the mindset of I'm a VO guy or I'm a VO gal and moving into a broader definition of what you do. I've always said, even before it was kind of a term, I've always marketed myself as a content creator. And that's just it. I'm very open in, and I mentioned this to you pre-show. Half of my business is video editing, and half of my business is video, and also proofreading, copywriting, script writing, directed sessions, things like that. I'm not a fan of all eggs in one basket. You are going to wind up with 6 eggs instead of a dozen, and 4 of them will be broken before you want. So yeah, it's diversifying yourself. And I think the big thing that we're probably not speaking directly to, but we should be, is that what we need in this industry right now, in order for the most of us to make this transition that we're currently in the middle of, is a reanalysis and a redefinition of who we are and what we do as business people.
Absolutely. I think that first of all, I think we need to redefine how we define success, right? It's not about at least it's less about, especially for creative freelancers, it's not about the big house and the cars. It's more about freedom and flexibility and being able to, go pick your kids up from school. And, maybe the trade for that is, you're doing a voice job at 9:00 at night, right? Our time is much more free and flexible, potentially, than it ever has been. And with that comes the ability to see ourselves as, you use the term content creator, I say creative freelancer, but it's the same thing. And to be able to come from a place of service, to be able to, have a conversation with somebody, figure out what kind of help that they need, and to be able to help them solve whatever pain points they have. That's at the core of every business. But I think we get so locked in on, I have to do this thing in order for me to be a success to myself. I look at the total cost-benefit analysis of your entire life, right? Yep. Look at what provides you joy. Is that money? Is that time freedom? Is that flexibility? Is it family time? What is it to you? And then sort of, as best you can, design or devise your income strategy to lead to that result.
And I think that that's an F that I'm going to make be the caboose of your freedom and your flexibility. And that is something that I think people don't take into consideration enough when thinking about this pursuit, and that is fulfillment. And, I always go back to John Cusack and say anything. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to market anything. I don't want to be involved. He's got this list of all these things that he doesn't want to be. And that's great. It's, still one of my favorite movies of all time. But there's an okayness that comes with marketing yourself, with selling yourself and your services, because what you get at the end of that, if you're successful, is a fulfillment that Gen X specifically has looked for in employment that they don't often find. You're not normally going to get that in a corporate environment. God knows I didn't. That's why I didn't last. But being able to say, I'll sum it up this way. At the beginning of the pandemic, I really stepped off a lot of social media myself, and for various reasons. But a lot of it was because at that very shaky time in our history as a culture and as a planet, frankly, I made a conscientious decision to stop being merely a consumer and to switch over and spend the rest of my days and my life energy being a creator. And I'm much happier and more fulfilled because of it. Has it been completely smooth sailing in my business? No, I'm in a downturn right now myself. But I go to bed every night going, I created something. It doesn't matter what it is. It might be a spreadsheet. It might be another chapter in my upcoming book. It might be a VO for somebody who said, I know this is really inconsequential, but could you help me with this VO? And I gave them exactly what they wanted, and I gave them more than they wanted, and they're thrilled. Those things are the reward for me. Yeah, the money coming in, that's something else. But if I go to bed every night going, I put something good into this world, I feel fulfilled because of that. That's got a value that actually does translate to my ledger, because it means I'm not going to burn out. It means I'm going to be able to ride through those dips because what I'm doing is fulfilling me in other ways. And I think that is completely underappreciated in the equation of whether or not I should be pursuing being a content freelancer.
I agree. And I read an interview with George Clooney years and years ago. And it's not verbatim, but essentially what he said was, there are movies, projects that I get to do, and there are projects that I kind of have to do, because the ones that I kind of have to do fund the ones that I get to do, right? So he's able to be a producer and to be able to do passion projects because he does this more commercial stuff that he doesn't always love as much artistically, but he understands the relationship between the two. And I think no matter what business you're in, there's stuff that you have to hold your nose and kind of do because you have to, but that's what allows you to do the stuff that you love to do. I don't always love marketing, right? Sometimes it's a drudgery. Sure. But if I don't market, I don't get to do the mic work that I love to do, right? And that's the that's the sort of yin-yang relationship that anybody faces in their business.
Chop wood,
you got to do the tough
chop
stuff.
wood, carry water, man.
Carry water, exactly.
Nobody wants to,
Absolutely.
but you know what? Everybody wants it done. Everybody wants to be warm and have something to drink. So, before we sum up, I have a question from the Booth Camp Discord server. My question is, my user Dustin asked something that kind of made a bit of a kerfuffle in our industry a few weeks or a couple months ago. And I'm not going to name names and be super specific, but if you're on social media and you follow the VO world, especially that of animation, you kind of heard of this. He wants to know, what would you do if you found that your voice was cloned for a project, and let's say that it wasn't even a commercialized project. Nobody's making money on this dynamic, but somebody cloned your voice without your expressed consent. And, in the instance of this question, this was somebody did a generative AI project that required some voice actors, had some voice actors that they knew step in, but one of the key figures in this project's voice was not available to be done by anybody else. So they cloned a rather noted VO animation actor, cloned their voice and used it. It was nothing but a passion project. But honestly, this VO artist found out and immediately got on social media and put the entire thing on blast, and really kind of went personal with it. If that were to happen to you, Paul, how would you address it, and how would you not address it? What's your tack?
Well, having the benefit of knowing that story now, I would like to think that I wouldn't be, especially if it's a non-commercial thing, I'm not losing any money. It's not that big a deal. The things that I want to protect are my reputation and my business, right? My wallet. Mm-hmm. So, the first thing is to kind of establish context. Is this, was this relatively harmless? Is this something that jeopardizes either my wallet or my reputation? A good example is Bev Standing, right? When TikTok commandeered her voice, when they bought a company that she had done AI work for, they just made her the voice of text-to-speech on TikTok. And the problem with that is it compromised Bev's reputation, because her voice was being used to say things that would never come out of her mouth, right? Often, sometimes vile, foul things. So that's a really good example of how your reputation can be affected. If that weren't the case, and if my wallet's not being protected, then I just want to kind of have a conversation with that person to figure out, what's the context, what was their aim, are they planning to use this in the future, things like that. There are other cases. For example, on my YouTube channel, we talked to an Irish voice actor, Remy Michelle Clark, who had her voice she originally thought stolen by AI, and as it turns out, she had signed a bad contract for work she had done with Microsoft, and Microsoft very legally sold her voice, her cloned voice, to an AI site, I think called Revoicer.
I think it was, yeah.
And, she now fully admits that she signed a bad contract. She didn't know. That could happen to any of us.
In much the same way that we got Siri. I mean, the voice performer that did Siri did not work for Apple. They worked for another content farm that they signed a contract with. It was all completely legal. She earned some decent money from that. But, a lot of people out or in the VO sphere, but outside that dynamic went, Apple stole that stuff. Imagine how much money she'd get from Apple. Well, the point is that she didn't do true due diligence on her own behalf back then, and signed into a contract that allowed a reselling of her material years after the fact.
That's largely true. The other thing that we have to be constantly aware of is the way technology is evolving. We have no idea how our voice, our recordings may be used in the future. And so the trap is we're not fortune tellers, right? And so we've got to rely on our legal people and on organizations like NAVA, National Association of Voice Actors, to try to not only push legislation, which protects our consent, control, and compensation, but also tries to be a bit of a fortune teller and try and figure out, okay, how do we future-proof our businesses and protect those 3 C's moving forward for technologies we haven't even dreamt of yet.
Exactly.
Right? That's the problem. And so coming back to those 3 C's, those are the things that I want to retain: control, consent, and compensation. Sometimes compensation isn't always in the mix.
Right.
For example, fan work, right? Like this example that you brought up. I would like to think that most people are reasonable, but if I find out that my reputation is being compromised or my business is being compromised, then I'm going to have to either try and work that out diplomatically or go after them legally.
And I think to sum that whole dynamic up, you would start with a shot across the bow versus going nuclear on social media immediately.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a shot across the bow. I would call it a conversation.
Yeah, a knock on the door. I was just
a knock on the door.
I was too military in my assessment, just because the initial response was so vocal, so public, and so viscerally driven.
And I don't agree with that, but I certainly understand it, right? Especially for, if somebody has reached a certain amount of success, they're ironically even more vulnerable than the everyday lunch pail voice actors that you and I are, right? So
nobody wants to clone an every man. You already have that.
Possibly, yeah. Certainly not for this fan fiction example that you brought up. And so I understand the visceral fear behind that, but I do think you've got to take a step back and understand that we're going to get a lot further, a lot faster if we all work together.
Well, and I'll give you the ability to plug your mug and say, "Kill it with kindness." Come at this with kindness first. I have to reach back behind my monitor to get mine that you sent me.
Nice.
As we go out here, what do you think the future holds? Let's do a little bit of crystal balling and prognostication. And I know I'm asking for the impossible right now, but let's try to dial it into the rest of this year and through 24. What are you seeing on the horizon for our industry?
I think a rising awareness among the general public and therefore among lawmakers that we need to be protected from unforeseen consequences of AI. The law will never catch up to the technology, but it's got a lot of catching up to do because not only nobody cares about the plight of the everyday voice actor, right? We're a small bunch and we're not enough to move the needle. But when Joe Blow gets his bank account broken into because he's had his voice cloned,
which is a thing that's already happened.
It's already happening. That's the kind of thing, and that's the kind of consequence that's going to have to happen in order to motivate lawmakers to delve into this issue, to get behind it, and to put in protections that will protect all of us. And I think as voice actors, certainly we will be able to not only get those benefits, but I think we'll be able to piggyback as an industry based on work like the folks like Tim Friedlander and Karin Gilfrey at NAVA are doing to try and get in front of lawmakers to raise that awareness and say, yes, this is a problem for everybody. This is a problem for you, Mr. and Mrs. Senator, because you're going to be potentially vulnerable as well. It's a problem for everyday people, and it's a problem for our industry. So let's all agree on that, and let's put forward protections that are appropriate for us all. I think that awareness will continue to increase. I do think in the short to medium term, we are all vulnerable. We will, there will be more Remy Michelle Clarks. And I want to applaud Remy for being an example to the rest of us. It's real easy for her to say, man, I signed a bad contract. I feel awful about this. I'm embarrassed. I'm going to crawl in a hole and die. Yeah. She didn't do that. She tells her story willingly so that the rest of us can benefit from her experience.
Yeah, there's no sense of I'm a victim here in Remy's approach. And I heard that when you were talking with her. I heard that in some things that I've heard afterwards. And I think that you're right. We're going to see more people who are willing to say, this happened because of my not looking hard enough at what I was doing, and now I'm paying. Now there's a consequence.
Yep. And when I say you have to treat it as a business, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Right?
Exactly.
If you the old adage, if you think it's expensive to hire a lawyer, it's more expensive not to hire a
Exactly
lawyer,
right.
Yeah.
What are you going to be doing differently here in the next stretch of the future? Is there anything that you're putting in by way of action, either protective or remedial, to make sure that you're going to be on the best footing possible?
I'm trying to take my own advice, and I've really, especially for 2023 and into 2024, one of my focus, certainly my artistic focus, is going to be on training. I've been training for months with Tina Morosco, and she has changed my life. I'm going to continue coaching with her. I'm going to continue to find ways to reach out either in a bigger scale or in a better way. I'm constantly looking at my processes and my messaging and how I'm interfacing with people on the business side. Constantly looking at how can I improve my marketing practices. And also, you mentioned the VO Freedom Master Plan. We haven't really mentioned VO Pro. That's the community built, yes, around the master plan, but also a community on its own. I'm really trying to build community and education within our business, because the best way that we can survive this thing, Andrew, is to be educated, is to understand the forces at play, and to be able to get the training that we need, to be able to come together as a community, to sometimes disagree, but let's do that civilly, right? I'm working on a video now where I vehemently disagree with another coach in this business, but I'm not going to attack him personally. I will attack his processes and his behaviors, but not him. No. Right? We need to have civil discourse, because even when we disagree, because if we don't, we're just, the house divided against itself.
Yeah,
right?
And we're just making a bigger mess that we all have to live in.
Absolutely. So I think we have to have hard conversations, but in a civil way.
Yep. And again, approaching it with kindness and a desire to find commonality goes a long way, even in this industry where so many people look at the other performer as competition. I don't. I look at them as inspiration.
And I think that's less true in voiceover. I think it's true for
I will
on-camera.
agree.
I think it's true
I
for
will
theater.
agree.
I think it's way less true in
And
voiceover.
I think a lot of people who do bring that kind of errant mentality are the ones that don't last, because they're constantly looking at everybody as competition when they could be looking at them as inspiration, and they wind up leaving disaffected because they don't get that level of traction, because they don't afford themselves the opportunity to be inspired. Hit people up, Paul, with the information, with the links to the VO Master Plan and all your other good stuff as we head out here.
I'll give you 3 quick links.
Please do.
VOFreedomMasterPlan.com. It's all one URL, VOFreedomMasterPlan.com. The VO Pro community, you can find out more about that at VOPro.app. And then all of that lives on paulschmidtpro.com. We've got resources, we've got videos, we've got blogs, we've got discounts for things, a lot of free resources.
A lot of free resources. I back that up, and I want people to know that you're a man cut of my own cloth, and that you are absolutely mindful of the fact that this is a business, but boy, you give a lot of stuff away for free, and it's got a real heavy value to what you are giving people, without asking for anything else other than a smile.
I appreciate that, Andrew. I'm trying to, my definition of success is how many people I can help at the end of the day. Sometimes that means getting paid. Sometimes it means just helping people, right? And you got to be smart about both. But at the end of the day, it's how many people did I help?
Agree. Paul, it's been great talking to you as always. I'm sure I'll see you in a number of months again on here. Everybody, this is the Booth to Booth podcast. Of course, I'm Andrew Scott, and that is friend of Booth to Booth, Paul Schmidt. And we will see you on the other side. You too, brother. I'm really glad that you were able to be here. Thanks a lot. And
I am too.
From
always
everybody
fun.
Here at these booths, we say, see you in the booth. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
From the beautiful Pacific Northwest, This has been Booth to Booth with Andrew Scott. Booth to Booth is a narrowband broadcast network production in association with AndrewScottMedia.com. Andrew Scott, executive producer. Our theme music was written and produced by Ron Kajawa. Website design and maintenance by Vicano Creative. Christopher Vicano, webmaster. Available at VicanoCreative.com. Audio and video production by Andrew Scott. Available at AndrewScottMedia.com. Got topic ideas, questions, or comments for the show? Email us at patchin@booth2booth.com or by simply clicking the link in the description. On behalf of host Andrew Scott, I'm Gwen Steele. From our booth to yours, thanks for joining us. See you next time on Booth to Booth.
NBBN.
The Narrowband Broadcast Network.
The focus is on you.